In the span of 4 months, I sent $19,000 to a woman I'd never met in person. I need you to hear that number again, $19,000. And I need you to understand, I wasn't some clueless fool. I was a 61-year-old American widower who ran his own HVAC business for over 30 years. I fixed things for a living. My hands knew their way around complex machinery, and I thought my mind knew its way around people. I prided myself on being a good judge of character, too savvy to be played. That judgment told me I was building a new life with the woman of my dreams. I sold my truck, packed 2 suitcases, and landed in Prague with a bouquet of roses, thinking I was moving into our new apartment in that beautiful Vinohrady neighborhood. The one she'd sent me photos of, the one I'd sent $5,000 to secure. I had the address memorized. I could see the whole future in my head. The apartment was real, and she was there when I buzzed. She opened the door, but it wasn't the warm smile from our video calls. Her face was cold, annoyed. And then a man, shirtless, appeared behind her shoulder, asking in Czech what was going on. She didn't invite me in. Standing there in the doorway, blocking the life I thought I had just purchased, she said in a flat, dead voice, "I am sorry. Things are different now. You should not have come." Then she closed the door. The click of that lock echoed in the hallway. I was left standing there, 6,000 miles from home, with 2 suitcases and a dying bouquet of flowers. This is the story of how a smart, careful man gets taken for everything, so you can make sure it never happens to you. To understand how I ended up in that hallway, we have to go back to where it all started, the crushing silence of an empty house. Before that Prague hallway, before Aneta, before any of it, there was a life. A good one. I was Gary Miller from Flint, Michigan. For 35 years, I was Brenda's husband, and for over 30, I was the owner of Miller's Heating and Cooling. It wasn't a big company, just me, a van, and a reputation for being the guy you called when no one else could figure it out. I've crawled through the guts of century-old buildings in the dead of winter and brought the heat back on. I've diagnosed a problem in a multi-ton commercial unit just by the change in its hum. Fixing things wasn't just my job, it was who I was, and I was good at it. When I sold the business, I walked away with a nest egg of about $350,000. Not enough to buy a yacht, but more than enough, I thought, to live comfortably, to not have to worry. I was secure. I was practical. I was a man who understood how the world worked. But after Brenda passed, the world stopped working. The cancer took her slowly, and it took a piece of me with her. For 3 years, the silence in our house became a physical presence. The same house where we raised 2 kids, where the noise of life was constant, was now just empty. The kids are grown, with their own families in other states. They call, of course, but their lives are full. Mine was empty. My hands, which had spent a lifetime fixing things, had nothing to fix. And you can't fix loneliness with a wrench. The breaking point came on Thanksgiving. I was sitting alone at the kitchen table, the one Brenda and I bought in 1988, eating a turkey dinner that came out of a plastic tray. I was scrolling through old photos on my phone, pictures of her, of us, of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. And the weight of it all just crashed down on me. I was 61 years old, and I felt invisible. That night, on an impulse, I signed up for an international dating website. I wasn't looking for some young model. I told myself I was just looking for a conversation, for a voice to fill the silence. I'd read about scams, sure, but I figured, after 30 years of dealing with every kind of customer and supplier, I was a pretty good judge of character. I could handle myself. Then I got a message. Her name was Aneta, a 48-year-old librarian from a town near Prague. Her profile pictures weren't glamorous. They were just normal. A smile in a garden, a photo with a book. Her messages were smart. She didn't just say hi. She asked about my work, what it was like running my own business. She asked about Brenda, but respectfully, gently. She made me feel like my past life, the one I was so proud of, still mattered. We started talking every day. For the first time in years, I felt like someone was actually listening. I didn't feel like a widower or a retiree. I felt like Gary again, and I felt seen. I felt wanted. That feeling, right there, was the beginning of the end. It was the key that unlocked everything. The conversations with Aneta went from once a day to all the time. Video calls in the morning, messages throughout the day, another call before I went to bed. The house didn't feel so empty anymore. I was fixing breakfast and she was right there on my phone, propped up against the sugar bowl, telling me about her day at the library. She made Prague sound like a storybook. We started talking about someday. Someday I'd visit. Someday she'd show me the Charles Bridge. Someday became soon. And soon is when the problems started. Problems I could fix. The first one came about a month in. Her face on the video call was tight with worry. Her mother, she said, was in terrible pain. An abscessed tooth, a needed root canal. The state insurance wouldn't cover the full cost. She was so embarrassed to even mention it. She kept saying. But she was in a bind. And I felt this surge. It was the old feeling. The feeling of a clear problem and a clear solution. I spent my whole life being the guy people called when they were in a bind. I knew how to do this. I told her not to worry, that I could help. Sending that first wire transfer for $1,500 didn't feel like sending money to a stranger. It felt like I was fixing something for my person. Her relief, her gratitude, it was overwhelming. I felt 10 feet tall. I had a purpose again. With that first problem solved, our future together suddenly felt more real. It was Aneta who found the apartment. It was perfect, she said, a 2-bedroom in a beautiful old building in Vinohrady. She sent me a link to a real estate website with beautiful photos of a sunny apartment with high ceilings. She even sent me a PDF of what looked like a rental agreement. It was all in Czech, of course, but it looked official. The landlord needed the first month's rent and a security deposit to hold it. $5,000. She said she had her half, but she needed my half to secure it before it was gone. I didn't hesitate for a second. This wasn't just sending money anymore. This was building a foundation. I could see myself in that apartment, making coffee in that kitchen. I sent the $5,000 feeling like I'd just bought the cornerstone of my new life. The next request was the big one, the one that should have stopped me cold. As we started planning the logistics of my move, she brought up the visa. She explained there was a complex Czech immigration rule. For her to sponsor my long-stay visa as my partner, she needed to prove to the government that she could support me. Her bank account had to show what she called a solvency fund. It was a specific amount, $10,000, and it only had to be in her account for 48 hours, just to be verified by an inspector. Then she'd wire it right back. $10,000. That was a real number, a number that made my stomach clench. I hesitated. For the first time, I felt a knot of doubt. She could see it on my face. Her expression changed. She got quiet. Her eyes welled up. She sent me links to what looked like official government websites explaining the rule. She asked if I didn't trust her. After everything, was this where I drew the line? And I looked at my situation. I'd already sent $6,500. I'd already told my kids I was moving. I told my friends. If I backed out now, I wasn't just a man who lost some money. I was a fool who'd been played. The shame of that felt worse than the risk. So I made the transfer. After that, the last request felt like nothing. A week before my flight, she called me, frantic. Her laptop had died, just stopped working. She said she needed it for her work at the library and to finalize all the little arrangements for my arrival. Could I help her buy a new one? I was going to be there in a few days. It felt like a safe, final investment in the life we were about to start. What was another $2,500 when I'd already committed so much more? It was the final touch. I was all in. $19,000. The cost of a new life. I booked my flight, sold my truck, packed my bags, and bought a bouquet of roses at the airport in Prague, ready to walk into the home I had already paid for. The flight over the Atlantic felt like a machine shedding my old skin. Every mile put more distance between me and the quiet house, between me and the man eating a microwave dinner on Thanksgiving. I looked out the window at the clouds, and for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't looking back. I was flying toward a voice, toward a smile on a screen that had promised me a second chapter. I felt a nervous energy thrumming in my chest, the kind I used to get before a big, complicated job. But this wasn't a broken furnace. This was a broken life I was about to fix. I was 61 years old, and I felt like a kid on his way to summer camp. Landing in Prague was a jolt of newness. The air smelled different. The language was a beautiful, sharp music I didn't understand. I found an ATM, pulled out some Czech crowns, and the first thing I did was buy flowers. A big bouquet of red roses from a little shop in the terminal. Holding them felt right. It felt like what a man does when he's about to meet the woman he's starting a new life with. I got a taxi and gave the driver the address in Vinohrady, the one I knew by heart. As the car moved through the city, past the ancient buildings and the modern storefronts. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs. I was a man who prided himself on being steady, but my hands were shaking just a little. I kept rehearsing the moment in my head. I'd ring the bell, she'd open the door, and I'd just smile and hand her the roses. No big speech. Just, I'm here. We pulled up to a beautiful old building, exactly like the photos she'd sent. It was real. I paid the driver, pulled my 2 suitcases from the trunk, and walked into the entryway. My reflection in the glass of the inner door showed a man holding a bouquet of flowers, looking both terrified and thrilled. I found her name on the directory next to the apartment number. It was real. I pushed the button. A moment of silence, and then the buzzer unlocked the door. That sound, that buzz was the sound of my future beginning. I walked up the 3 flights of stairs, my steps echoing in the quiet stairwell. I found the door, took a deep breath, and knocked. It opened, and it was her. Aneta, the same face from the video calls, the same eyes. But they weren't smiling. Her face was a cold, hard mask of annoyance. Before I could even speak, a man in his 50s appeared behind her. He was shirtless, with a towel slung over his shoulder, and he looked at me and said something in Czech, his voice gruff. Aneta didn't look at him. She looked right at me, her eyes empty of all the warmth I'd come to know. She didn't invite me in. She didn't move. She stood there, blocking the doorway to the life I had purchased, and spoke in a flat, dead tone I'd never heard before. I am sorry, she said. Things are different now. You should not have come. And then she closed the door. It wasn't a slam. It was a simple, quiet click. The sound of a lock engaging. The sound of a life ending before it had even begun. I just stood there, in a hallway 6,000 miles from home, with 2 heavy suitcases, a dying bouquet of red roses in my hand, and a complete, crushing silence of a future that had just been stolen from me. For a while, that feeling was enough. The feeling of being wanted. It became my new routine. I'd wake up, make coffee, and prop my phone against the sugar bowl. And there she'd be, Aneta, smiling from Prague. We didn't just talk about the weather. We talked about everything. She'd asked me about the most difficult HVAC job I ever did, and she'd actually listened to the answer. I told her about the time I had to custom fabricate a part for a pre-war furnace in a historic downtown building, how everyone else said to scrap it, but I got it running for another decade. She looked at me with this admiration, and I'd ask her about the library, and she'd tell me about the old books she was archiving, the smell of old paper and leather. It felt like we were building a world together, a world made of words, a world that was a whole lot warmer than my empty house. The talk slowly shifted from my life and her life to our life. It wasn't a sudden thing. It was gradual. We started using the word we. We should watch that movie tonight, she'd say, and we'd sync it up and watch together, 6,000 miles apart. Then it became, when I'm there, we'll go to that cafe you like. They got closer and closer, until it was the only thing that seemed real. And that's when the first problem showed up. That's when my old instincts, the ones that served me so well for 30 years in business, got turned against me. She was on the video call one morning, and the smile was gone. Her face was pale, tight with worry. She kept touching her jaw. She told me her mother had a terrible toothache, had been up all night. The dentist said it was a bad abscess, needed a root canal immediately. But the state insurance, she explained, it didn't cover the whole procedure. She said it so fast, like she was ashamed. She said, "Gary, I am so sorry to even bring my problems to you." And she looked away from the camera. And right there, I felt it. A surge of purpose. It was the same feeling I get when a frantic customer called me at 2 in the morning because their heat went out and their kids were freezing. A problem. A person in distress. And I, Gary Miller, was the man who could fix it. I knew how to fix things. I said, "Aneta, don't you worry about a thing. How much is it? Just tell me what you need." She hesitated, said she couldn't ask. And that, of course, just made me more determined. $1,500. The number barely registered. I've written checks for more than that for a single compressor unit. This wasn't a business expense. This was taking care of family. I told her I'd wire it that morning. The relief that washed over her face, it was like watching the sun come out. She cried a little. She told me I was the kindest man she'd ever known. And when I walked out of that Western Union, I didn't feel like I'd just sent money. I felt like I had protected my own. I felt strong. I felt needed. That one act, That one fix changed everything. It made our future concrete. A few weeks later, Aneta called me, but this time she was bursting with excitement. She'd found it, the perfect place for us. A 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood she said was one of the most beautiful in Prague. Vinohrady. She said the word like it was a piece of music. She sent me a link to a website. It was full of pictures, big windows, hardwood floors, high ceilings. It looked like something out of a magazine. Someone will take it, Gary, she said, her voice urgent. Good places go so fast. She sent me a PDF file. It was a rental contract, all in Czech, covered in official-looking stamps. She said the landlord was an old man who wanted the first month's rent and a security deposit in cash to hold it. $5,000. She told me she had her half saved, $2,500, but she was short the other half. I looked at the pictures of that sunny apartment. I wasn't seeing a real estate listing. I was seeing myself waking up in that bedroom. I was seeing us making breakfast in that kitchen. This wasn't a wire transfer. This was a down payment on a life. It was a foundation. I said, of course, I'll send it today. I didn't even question it. In my mind, I was a man securing a home for his family. And when I sent that $5,000, I felt a thrill. I wasn't just a retired guy in Michigan anymore. I was a man with a future, a man with a home in Prague. The next one was the big one, the one that should have been a blaring alarm, a red flashing light. But by then, I was so invested, I couldn't see the signals. We were planning the logistics of the move. I was looking at flights. I was figuring out what to do with my truck. And Aneta called, her tone serious, official. She said she'd been talking to an immigration consultant. She explained this complicated Czech rule, how for her to sponsor my long-stay visa as her partner, she had to prove financial solvency to the immigration authorities. She had to show that she could support me. It had to be a specific amount of money in her personal bank account for just 48 hours. A solvency fund, she called it. An inspector would verify the balance, sign a form, and that was it. Then she could wire it right back to me. The amount was $10,000. That number hit me in the gut. $10,000. That wasn't fixing a tooth or securing a flat. That was real money. That was a chunk of the nest egg I'd worked my whole life to build. For the first time, I felt a cold knot of doubt in my stomach. I was quiet for a long time, and she saw it. I watched her face fall on the screen. Her eyes welled up. You don't trust me, she said, her voice barely a whisper. After all this, after everything we've planned, she sent me links to websites that looked like official government pages, with the Czech lion emblem and everything, explaining the financial requirements. They were fakes, of course, but at the time, they looked real enough. And I stood at a crossroads. I'd already sent $6,500. I'd already told my son and daughter I was moving to Prague to be with the woman I loved. I told my friends, if I stopped now, if I called this off because I was scared, what did that make me? I wouldn't just be a man who lost $6,500. I'd be a fool, a lonely old man who got played. And the shame of that, the thought of having to explain that to everyone, it felt 100 times worse than the risk of sending the money. I prided myself on being a good judge of character. I told myself I was smart, that I could see a scam a mile away. And this felt bureaucratic, complicated, not like a scam. So I rationalized it. This is just how Europe works. It's different. It's not America. I made the transfer. That one hurt. I walked out of the bank feeling sick to my stomach, telling myself over and over again that I'd done the right thing, that in 48 hours, the money would be back and the final piece of our future would be locked in place. After the $10,000, the last request felt like an afterthought. It came a week before my flight. Aneta called me, and she sounded frantic, her voice tight with panic. Her laptop had just died. A black screen. She said she was in the middle of finalizing everything for my arrival, arranging for a cleaner for the apartment, coordinating with the landlord, her work at the library. She said she couldn't do anything without it. I was so close. I was 7 days from getting on a plane and starting my new life. What was I going to say? No. After everything, I was exhausted. I was done with problems. I just wanted to be there. I just wanted it all to be over. $2,500 for a new laptop. It felt like the last 5 yards of a marathon. It was just one final push to get over the finish line. I sent the money without a second thought. It was just the cost of making sure everything was perfect. That was the last of it. $19,000. The price of a second chance. With the money gone, All that was left was the hope. I sold my truck to a kid down the street, packed 30 years of my life into 2 suitcases, and drove to the airport. I was leaving the quiet house, the ghosts, the loneliness, all of it behind me. I was a man who had fixed every problem thrown his way. And now, I was finally going home. I stood there. I don't know for how long. The roses were still in my hand. I could feel the thorns pressing into my palm. I thought about knocking again. My hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I could hear them inside. A low murmur of voices. His and hers. They weren't arguing. They were just talking. The sounds of a normal afternoon. In the apartment I had paid for. My apartment. I turned around and walked down the stairs. Each step down felt like falling. When I got to the street, the sun was bright. The beautiful Vinohrady neighborhood. People were walking their dogs, pushing strollers. I saw a small cafe across the street. I managed to get my suitcases over there, and I sat down at an outdoor table. The roses were still in my hand. I looked at them, these stupid, wilted things, and I just dropped them on the ground next to my chair. I ordered a coffee I didn't want. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the cup. I pulled out my phone, my lifeline for the last 4 months. I tried to call her. The call didn't ring. It just made a weird beep and ended. I tried again. Same thing. I opened up our chat. Her picture was gone. It was just a gray silhouette. I typed, "Aneta, what is going on? I'm at the cafe across the street. Please come talk to me." I hit send. 1 check mark. The message just sat there, undelivered. My heart was a cold, tight knot in my chest. I went to the dating website, the place where it all started. I searched her name. Aneta. User not found. The profile, the pictures in the garden, the photo with the book. All of it, just gone. Vanished, as if it never existed. And that's when I finally did it. I opened my banking app. I didn't want to. I had to. I scrolled down, and there it was. My life for the past 4 months, laid out in a neat, orderly column of debits. Western Union, $1,500. Wire transfer, $5,000. Wire transfer, $10,000. Western Union, $2,500. Each number was a separate, distinct act of my own foolishness. It wasn't for a tooth. It wasn't for a deposit. It wasn't for a visa. It was for this. It was for this moment. For me to be sitting at a wobbly table in a city where I knew no one, with 2 suitcases full of a life I couldn't go back to, staring at a screen that proved the whole thing was a lie. There was no problem to fix. I was the problem. My loneliness was the problem. And she had fixed it, hadn't she? For $19,000. That's my story. I'm telling it to you now from a small, rented room back in Michigan, 6 months after I stood in that hallway. I spent 2 weeks in a cheap hotel in Prague, just walking around the city in a daze, trying to make sense of it all. The flight home was the longest flight of my life. I had to call my kids and tell them I was coming back, that the whole thing was a lie. That was the hardest part. All told, between the $19,000 I sent her and another $3,000 in travel and costs to get myself home, I lost $22,000. I'm not broken. I'll be okay. But I am humbled, right down to the bone. And sitting here, I can't help but think there's another guy out there, just like me, lonely and hopeful, about to make the same mistakes. So if that's you, I need you to listen. I paid a high price for these lessons, and I'm giving them to you for free. First, you have to understand the fixer trap. I spent my whole life being the guy who solves problems. When she told me about her mother's tooth, my first instinct wasn't suspicion, it was purpose. I could fix that. They don't just ask for money. They create problems that only you, the capable, resourceful man, can solve. They aren't selling you a romance. They're selling you the feeling of being needed. And if you're lonely, that feeling is the most powerful bait in the world. Second, they use bureaucracy as a weapon. No government in the world, especially not in Europe, requires your foreign girlfriend to hold thousands of your dollars in her personal bank account to prove anything for a visa. That is always a lie. It sounds complicated and official, and that's the point. It's designed to confuse you and make you feel like you're just navigating a foreign system. Before you send a single dollar for any official reason, you hang up the phone and you call the official embassy of that country yourself. You talk to a real government employee. You verify every single rule. And third, they know when to push. They almost there push. That $10,000 request didn't come at the beginning. It came after I'd already sent money, after I'd already told my family I was leaving, after I'd bought the plane ticket in my mind. They wait until you are so emotionally and financially committed that backing out feels like a bigger, more humiliating failure than pushing forward. They know you'll be too embarrassed to admit you might have been wrong, and they'll use that shame against you to get the last, biggest piece of your savings. I'm not telling you to give up on finding love, wherever it may be, but I am telling you to guard your life savings with your life. Love doesn't require a wire transfer. A real partner will be terrified of you losing your money, not inventing reasons to ask for it. If you're talking with someone new and they ask for money, for any reason, no matter how plausible it sounds, I need you to do one thing for me. Stop. Step away. And remember my story. Because if telling this story stops just one guy from standing alone and broke in a foreign hallway, then it was worth every penny of the $19,000 it cost me to learn.